my perspective, I draw back to we would call the Vedic paradigm. So I've touched on this idea of Ayurveda, which is an ancient system of healthcare. Some people may have heard of it. Which is basically living in tune with the laws of nature. You know, we sit in our office or we go outside to a park, and we could, if we take this time to observe the universe, we'd understand that within it there's this intelligence that organizes everything. You know, seasons come at certain times, planets revolve around the sun, a baby's born and it grows in this intelligent, organized manner, largely. You know, the ears are in a certain place and the heart's in a certain place, because that's what it needs to function optimally.
Welcome to the Global Affair podcast, brought to you by Love Out Loud, the world's largest love-based movement, actualizing a civilization of love by 2030. My name's Nicole Gibson, and join me and some of the world's brightest minds as we bring some of the most important and controversial conversations of our time into a space of unity. It's important to know that as your host, this isn't about my personal opinion or bias, but rather an opportunity to listen with love, honesty, curiosity, and reveal the true universal experience us humans have amongst the differences. So if you love the show, please let us know by giving us a rating and tell us how to make this conversation easier for other people to jump into as well. And with that, let's get it. Mark Bunn, thank you so much for coming on the Global Affair. It's a pleasure to have you.
It's a great pleasure to be with you and all your listeners, Nicole.
Thank you. So the global affair that is health really is, I think one of the most timeless conversations we can have, which is very fitting for someone who's all about East meets West, which I personally love so much, as I know all of our listeners do. We seem to share a sentiment that there's a holistic approach that's necessary when you're looking at the human system, that we're not just a limb, we're not just an eye. We are a spiritual, mental, emotional, physical being. My personal belief is that the more we can harmonize, the healthier we are.
Yes.
So I'd love to just get a summary of your mission in your words. What is the legacy that Mark's here to leave on the planet?
My legacy is to simplify what I call the ancient wisdoms of health and happiness. So I think all your listeners will resonate with this idea that, yes, Western science has certain benefits, but back in my day, when I was a younger man, I had an AFL football background, so very much about performance and sort of high-level performance. But midway through it, I realized I was just getting bombarded with all these different and often contradictory words of advice. And it wasn't until I finished that, I was studying Western health science at the time too, and I was just as confused giving advice to my clients. But I traveled throughout Southeast Asia, and I'd go into these little remote villages, and of course, people that have been to similar cultures, poor, hardly had the shirt on their back, but there was this sort of happiness and joy fundamentally to their life. So it really intrigued me. So I began researching all the Eastern traditions, and you used the term timeless. These timeless traditions where this knowledge of just how to live life so we enjoy a happy, fulfilling, loving life has been there forever. So I'd really like my legacy to help bring the world back to sort of embracing these wisdoms, not seeing them as these archaic, simple in terms of, we think they're too basic or they're behind the times, but really understanding that there's these age-old wisdoms that we can still integrate into a very fast-paced, busy, dynamic, high-performance sort of Western world.
There's so much in there to unpack, so I'm excited for that. And one thing I've learned through having these conversations is often the thing that we feel most inspired by and motivated to create in the world has come, not always, but often from some kind of experience of the opposite, some kind of deficit. So the first question I'm inclined to ask is, when you were having those experiences in new communities and really seeing the simplicity that happiness really can be, were you happy at that point in your life, Mark?
I was. And I still had the same experience today, Nicole. It's really interesting. I really grateful for spending about 3 or 4 months a year in Bali working at an Ayurvedic sort of health resort. But I always say it, and your colleague Alex, she was over there a few months ago and we met, and she had this story about being in Canggu, and there was a husband and wife that looked like they're on a motorbike, had this looked like precious cargo on the back of their bike. And there was an accident and it fell off the back and smashed on the ground. And Alex was horrified. And she thought, oh no, it's all how to. And she said both the husband and wife, presuming it was husband and wife, got off the bike, looked and just laughed. They started laughing. And all these onlookers who came to help also just started to laugh. And I tell that story because for me, every time I go to these cultures, and I'm sure it's the same with most of your listeners, it's like a lesson in life. And I do come back to Melbourne and I get busy and I think things are so much more serious than they are. And I do experience that stress, and then I experience the exact opposite when I go and spend time with these people, where it's just that more relaxed way of living, and things aren't as serious, and it's all about connection and family and the village and love and so yeah, it's a beautiful life lesson. And yes, there's certainly that first-hand experience of experiencing the opposites.
Yeah, right. And so within these kind of epiphanies that you're having through this exposure, what were some of the things that really started to fundamentally transform in your life as a result of that?
Yeah, the two big ones for me were, and again, with the research I subsequently did on these long-living healthy cultures, the two that stand out separate to what most people think of. We think of the healthy foods and the fact their foods aren't as processed and they've got clean, fresh air and water, and which is really important. But the two big ones were the sense of community, that everything revolves around the family unit or the village, or, the mother's sick, then the auntie takes over, or the uncle, or whatever it is. And the other one that's really starting to come out now, even from a scientific perspective, is just this, how we view aging, particularly in our Western societies. It's very much this youth obsessed world. Everything's about being younger and anti-aging, and the older we get, almost the less valued or the less revered we are. Stick granny into the nursing home and, let's be done with her, and all this isolation that they experience. Whereas in these long living cultures, the older one gets, the more revered, the more venerated, the more they're put on a pedestal for their wisdom and their sage advice. So they're actually able to guide the community with that sort of lifetime's one of wisdom, which has since then really changed my way of sort of interacting, and obviously so great now over the last decade to have all the research on social connections come out to sort of reinforce that. But yeah, they were the two big ones that have shaped things for me.
And what was the implication of that? I'm looking forward to getting to the research, but I always love to dive a bit deeper into the human, and what spurred them on their journey. In having these understandings and realizations, just for someone maybe listening that this is a new kind of concept for them, just hypothetically, where you were prior, so what actually fundamentally started to change in your everyday life as a result of understanding these concepts, that with age, when there's appropriate kind of initiation and rites of passage, that the aging process can actually be a beautiful process and not something that should be resisted or,
Yes.
trying to remove it completely, which I completely agree. I think that especially for women, right, that's such a challenging hurdle for so many women.
Very
And
much.
I think we missed out on the gift that can be
Yeah,
the wisdom that comes with time on the planet.
absolutely.
But what were the ways that your personal life started to change through these awakenings?
Yeah, the two that jump out in terms of the community was one that I left Melbourne when I was about 30, went to Sydney, thinking Sydney was sort of like the hub for Australia, and I travelled and I was sort of speaking, and it was good to get away from the family in a sense and get my own wings. But I lost a partner. I got married when I was about 36, and a few months after that, she got diagnosed with breast cancer. So that really brought into sort of focus for me this. Oh yes, I had the theory of Ayurveda and long life, but now life was presenting me with a real life example of what do you do, and I realised it wasn't as easy as the theory made out, and so that just gave me so much more compassion and empathy for others. And then we leaned on her parents and her family and her friends, and I realised at that time just how more important that was to my well-being and her well-being than just having the right herbs and doing the meditation and all those things. And not long after she passed, about 7 years after that, and not long after that, I actually moved back to Melbourne for the sole purpose just to be closer to my family and my friends and my roots, and that's sort of the key one. And I'll often say that at events, that when we think of health and well-being, we still, most of us think of, oh, I've got to eat better, I've got to get to the gym, I've got to, whereas this idea of how are your relationships, how are your connections, can you forgo a gym session to go out to that party or that social function or to catch up with an old friend, and just putting these things on the same level, if not a higher level, in terms of our well-being. And the second one is probably just in the last 2 years. I've joined a men's group here in Melbourne. I was still feeling this sort of little bit of loss of connection, even back in Melbourne, a tribe around me. So I joined a men's group, and it's almost love at first sight. I walked in, and the very first night there was a man there who saw me, and it was that the eyes engaged. And from that second, we realized that we'd just found this amazing connection. His name was Mike, and ironically enough, his birthday is today, and he's 80 years old. And he has taught me so much about this idea of this wisdom and this experience of life. And he's so vital, and he's so sort of in touch with his own emotions and vulnerability and strength as a man, but also that sort of feminine side. And I have got so much gold from just spending time with him over the last few years, and it's really cemented this sort of thread of discussion we've touched on about just honoring the older people in our lives and sort of getting that wisdom and that gold that they've found over their lifetime, and my life's improved so much from it. So that's been my sort of personal examples, I think.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think it always creates just this amplification of the why it's important to entertain some of these ideas that are a little outside the mainstream. When you hear someone's lived experience of going through grief and how some of these ideas actually supported that process of grief, loneliness, these are things that all of us experience, right? And what's fascinating to me about these examples is they're both anchored in the power of human connection.
Yes.
That we can all do the right things physically. We can be trying to biohack our way to happiness.
Yes.
But is that really happiness in the truest sense on a human level?
Yes.
And I really think that we run this risk. I mean, I was sharing with you, we're developing this technology at the moment, in truth technology, and we're in that space, of biohacking and wearables. And so a part of that is this echo chamber of conversation in the longevity space. And I so often feel that it's my responsibility to be this voice of humanity in that space, because we're getting lost, in my opinion, in all the numbers and the data and the this and the that we can have all of those things, but if we don't have an open heart, and we don't have a community of people we can truly trust who love us unconditionally, it can still feel so empty.
Yes. And it'll be fascinating to see, once you've released the technology, how even individuals can compare what the data shows from those times where maybe they are feeling isolated and lonely, they haven't got their tribe, versus when they're in that environment where they are, more connected and more nourished emotionally. And so it's going to be a fascinating watch. So yeah,
That's
forward
the
to it.
plan. I mean,
Yeah,
even in blue zones, right? The assumption was blue zones are blue zones because they're eating the Mediterranean diet or this or
yeah,
that. But really, when it came down to it, the 90-year-olds were playing backgammon with the 7-year-olds until 9, 10 p.m. at night, and there was
yeah,
a constant sense of community and connectedness.
yes,
This for me needs to be something that we put an emphasis on as we go through this acceleration of technology, to
yes.
not lose sight of that. So, this brings
Beautiful.
me to my next question. What has the research you've done, how has that started to reveal itself? What have been the fundamental learnings through some of your work? And maybe for anyone that's not familiar with your work, giving an overview,
Yeah.
of what your focus has been.
Yeah, so it's a great question to loop it back to the research. And I think many people are becoming more familiar with it. And I think rather than going through many different studies, I think the best way is just to go through the longest study that's ever been done on human well-being. And many listeners, I'm sure, are familiar with the Harvard study. It's now been going 80 years. When I first heard about it, was been going about 72 years, I think. And they had 4 different directors, but basically they followed 2 groups of individuals in America from their late teens, early 20s. One was from a low socioeconomic, Boston tenements, and one was from a high socioeconomic, those that were just starting off at Harvard. And basically they've been following them as well as their families, their loved ones, their significant others, right throughout their lives. And in simple terms, basically what they found was that the most important factor on our well-being throughout our life has very little to do with our blood pressure, our cholesterol, how much sleep we get, how much exercise we do. But the 2 key factors were the number of social connections we have and the quality of our relationships. And it wasn't so much that we think of them in terms of when times are good. We think of these Asian and European cultures and you're sitting around and you're drinking wine and it's fun, and which is fantastic. But particularly when life was challenging or tough, that we have these social connections or relationships that we can lean on and lean into to help us get us through those difficult times. So, but it was very, very clear, and that was really reinforcing and backing up what a number of other sort of institutes and health science facilities had been saying in similar ways. So I think that's a really good study just to sort of bring it all together.
Yeah, brilliant reference, and it is a fascinating study,
Mm.
Harvard study into what happiness truly means. Uh, for someone that's, maybe listening to this and it still feels out of reach, Mark, where to begin? Maybe someone's feeling that they're in a similar place to how you felt when you were moving back to Melbourne, or even more isolated, where
Yeah.
they feel disconnected. And I think many people feel like this right now.
Yes.
Um, how to become stronger, than that loneliness in
Mm.
such a way that would actually allow you to start making different choices and being socially braver, or what are the criteria that someone can have a think about to transform this within their own life?
Beautiful question. I love it. I have a friend of mine developing an app called Like Hearted, where his vision is to create this legacy where people who are feeling that way can connect with other people in that sort of like-hearted space. And that inspired me to really think about the question deeply. And I think the first one is just, we touched on earlier, is just to prioritize that our emotional well-being and our relationships are as important, if not more important than, as we discussed, having this so-called ideal diet and getting to the gym and exercise and sleep, etc. And then what I've developed in a sense is just these 4 key areas that anyone, as you're saying, where my relationships aren't great, where do I start? How do I sort of get to the first step? And the 4 key areas really cover wherever we are on the relationship or social connection journey. And number 1 is nourish the good ones we do have. if you're in a loving relationship with a significant other, or you've got children that you know, great relationship with, or you've got a really good friend network, just to not get complacent, always be telling these people how much you love them and you appreciate them, and getting on the phone and putting time with these people as high up your to-do list or priority list as the other things we've discussed in terms of health and well-being. Number 2 is to heal maybe past relationships or connections that have soured a little bit. Most of us have probably got someone in our lives that, just because of a bit of pride or a little bit of an argument some years ago, well, stuff that person, had it with them. But for the potential of a 30, 40, 50-year friendship, maybe just putting that pride aside and getting on the phone or sending them a message or having a cup of coffee and just saying sorry could really be a simple way to regenerate a lifelong relationship. Number 3 is basically to cut toxic relationships. We all know about this principle of, until we make space for what we want, it's very hard to attract that into our lives. So if we're in relationships or social connections that are really just toxic to us, I call them the energy vampires, the people that just take and take and take, and we're always giving and giving and giving, and it just never resolves. Maybe it's time to sort of introduce those people to another group of friends. But that might sound harsh, but it's just, it's a big world. We just resonate with certain people, and it's okay to nourish ourselves, and that's important. And then number 4 is create. If someone's sitting there and they've moved to a new city or a new country and they just don't have those connections, then it's just getting creative about what ways that they can maybe put themselves into more uncomfortable relationships or situations, joining the community centre or the gym or the group at work, and taking those invitations to connect with others, and over time develop those networks and connections, whereas previously they might have been shy or scared or embarrassed. So nourish the good ones, heal the ones that could be good, cut the bad ones, and then create new ones wherever we can.
I think it's so simple but brilliant, and how many of us actually take these audits, right? I'm also doing a bit of a mind read, maybe to some of our listeners in particular who potentially are kind of top of their field. Maybe they've grown into substantial amounts of success, right? And
Yes.
I can also speak from personal experience to share my own vulnerability. As you rise in success, you don't always know who's truly a friend,
Yes.
And this third category of auditing the toxic relationships in your life, I'm curious to hear your perspective, just to bring some more nuance into that conversation. Maybe there's relationships in your life that aren't, outwardly or overtly toxic, but they're not necessarily helping you get to where you want to go. Or maybe you have incredible people in your life that truly love you, but your own kind of paranoia or anxiety is actually preventing you from being able to have a relationship which is really built on respect and is truly kind of reciprocal.
Yes.
What would your guidance be to someone that maybe finds themselves in that situation?
Yeah, beautiful question. And I think in the theme of just trying to keep everything simple, as you've touched on as well, is coming back to really the essence of Ayurveda and these long-living sciences. They have an understanding of what we call self-referral wisdom. Self-referral means we refer back to ourselves, that quiet, non-physical, intangible part of ourselves where all-knowing consciousness is. And so whether it's a food, we eat a food, do we actually tune into ourselves and do we feel better? We feel more energy and good with this food, or this diet, do we not feel so? And it's the same with relationships. We've all had experiences where we've walked into a party and we've met someone where instantly, without any conscious thought, we just get this resonance. This person, it feels great. I love this person, not love, but I want to spend more time with them. We're on the same wavelength. And then other people where we just get this icky sort of feeling where our energy almost gets sapped. And so in that essence is the answer to your question, I believe. We always get this self-referral feedback with any relationship, whether it's a work relationship where we're focused on, working together in a joint venture to create some successful business, or whether it's a more personal relationship. There's always this internal feeling, and it's just a matter of getting out of our heads, rationalizing, what the pros and cons are, to just tuning in and getting that feeling. And the body will always give us that wisdom. So I hope that answers the question. I know it's a little bit abstract, but otherwise it just gets complicated.
I think this actually is an entry point into a depth of conversation I'd love to have if you're willing to sort of keep on this track. Because I think that these concepts, are given quite frequently and freely. Rid your life of toxic relationships and put yourself out there, and like invest in the relationships that you have, and yet still, in the abundance of that particular advice, we have 80% of the world that's lonely. And what I'm loving about your perspective as a shared perspective is that true connection is really at the heart of holistic health, right?
Yes.
So I think this is a really worthy conversation to just continue to get into the crevices and the nuances of this conversation that often aren't touched, and the wisdom that you're referring to, really trusting your own antenna and your own body as that place of feedback. It takes a huge amount of self-trust, right? Self-awareness, self-trust, loving yourself enough to actually know what it means to respect yourself.
Yes.
And understand the standards that you have, and ensuring that those standards are actually anchored in your own integrity. So not expecting from a relationship something you're not willing to give. These are all sort of concepts that require deep self-reflection and personal development. And I think that that's often missed from this conversation, that how to build a relationship with yourself first, so that this discernment actually becomes a lot more natural, because I think for many people, it's not so easy to discern.
Yes. Love it.
Yeah, just your perspective on building that relationship with yourself.
Yeah. My perspective, I draw back to, we would call the Vedic paradigm. So I've touched on this idea of Ayurveda, which is an ancient system of healthcare. Some people may have heard of it. Which is basically living in tune with the laws of nature. We sit in our office or we go outside to a park, and if we take this time to observe the universe, we'd understand that within it, there's this intelligence that organizes everything. Seasons come at certain times, planets revolve around the sun, a baby's born, and it grows in this intelligent, organized manner, largely. The ears are in a certain place and the heart's in a certain place, because that's what it needs to function optimally. And so these laws of nature that govern life are everywhere. They're in the way we digest food, they're in the seasonal cycles, but they're also in relationships. We as an entity are designed to connect to others, biologically hardwired for connection, basically, as the neuroscientists would tell us. And so in the broader field of what they call Vedic science, which is not just the health perspectives, which is Ayurveda, they have this understanding that, like you would probably say, Nicole, that love is the foundation of everything in life. The same principle in Vedic science is that consciousness or bliss is the fundamental element of life. And so, like watering a tree, one of my great teachers, his name is Maharishi. He was the man who brought TM meditation out to the world many, many years ago. But what I most loved about here was this analogy of watering the roots to enjoy the fruits. And he would speak about a tree. A gardener wants the tree to be strong and robust and healthy and have beautiful mangoes. But if they water the leaves and the branches, they can spend all day trying to nourish the leaves and the branches and the fruits, and the tree will die. But spending just 1 or 2 minutes watering what we can't see with the eyes, which is the roots, we spend a couple of minutes and the tree flourishes. The branches are strong, the leaves are green and beautiful, there's beautiful, bountiful fruit. And so it's the same principle with whatever area of life, and we're talking about relationships now. So water the root to enjoy the fruit. As you've touched on beautifully, Nicole, is the root of all our relationships is the relationship we have with ourself. So how do we get self-referral? We transcend, basically. We have to go beyond all these levels of, the mental state of, oh, I'm not confident enough, or I'm going to embarrass myself, or the feeling level. And underlying our thoughts, emotions, feelings is consciousness. So we have to have ways that we can transcend, whether that's through meditation or time in nature or, sound therapies, that get us to that experience of what we would call pure consciousness. When we have that experience, then naturally, like nourishing all the different branches of a tree spontaneously, we start to nourish and strengthen our emotional connections, our feeling level, our rational thought, our confidence, our self-esteem. And so, yeah, I think there's no other way to do it. And the reason it's probably a long answer to a seemingly straightforward question is we can't resolve these issues on the level of the mind or the emotions alone. It's like Einstein, I think, said, you can't fix a problem on the level of the problem. You've got to go to a deeper level. So everything in Vedic science is geared towards this enlivening consciousness, that deepest part of ourselves. We can't see it, we can't touch it like the roots of a tree. They're underground. But if we can enliven that, then every branch, every leaf, every fruit starts to get nourished, like in our own lives.
Firstly, not a straightforward question. I think, one of the most existentially complex questions, that one can ponder.
Yes.
Really. I love this answer and also this analogy. It's really, I think, highlights, the efforting so many of us can put into,
Yes.
the areas and the things that don't actually move the needle for us. And I also love TM meditation, right? But one of the things I've had to learn through my journey actually was, and I laugh looking back now, because through my whole life, people have said, "You're so out there, Nick. You're so out there," And I never really thought much of it. And then probably a few years ago, I think 2 or 3 years ago, I went through another just awakening, in my own life, the aggregation of a set of circumstances, which really just primed me to reach a new level of self-awareness.
Yeah.
Also my Saturn return. So, I think probably, and the global pandemic and starting a tech company all at the same time.
Yeah.
And what I actually learned through that, Mark, was I needed to come in to the body, in order to get a deeper level of self-referral. And
Yes.
so really, I had to feel myself in high definition. And I
Yes.
had spent so much of my life because, I am a person that can, the concepts I contemplate are more real most of the time than the physical reality in front of me. And
Yes.
I didn't understand as a younger person that's not everyone's, system, that many people struggle to see and connect to a concept, whereas that was my go-to. My
Yeah.
imagination was kind of vivid. But I wasn't, in real time a lot of the time. And so my practice has actually been coming back into the body. And as a result of that, really being able to feel through this 360-degree awareness of my body, like this is where this wall is and this is where I am. And I can
Yes.
viscerally feel that, I can locate myself now. But when I started doing this work, I couldn't. Like
Yes.
I had no sensory perception of that. And so just selfishly, I'd love to hear you speak to the balance between going out there and finding, the keys of the universe, and then also understanding the universe within,
Yes.
and the different practices that can help us master those two dimensions.
Yeah. Beautiful. So, again, I'd love to use an analogy that Maharishi uses, because I think a lot of people have misinterpreted not only his message, but this whole idea of Eastern wisdom and, to get inverted commas, enlightened or self-realized. You've got to leave the world and, go and sit in the cave and do long hours of meditation. And Maharishi actually really poo-pooed this whole idea. He said, no, 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 no. This idea of meditating and getting enlightened is not to remove yourself from the world. It's to live what he called 200% of life, that we have 100% of the inner. We're calm, we're content, we're blissful, we're experiencing that love at the foundation of the universe, but we're also 100% in the world. We're dynamic, we're fulfilling our purpose, what we'd call dharma in the Vedic perspective. But he says the way we do this is not just through the meditation. He says, as important as the deep rest and the meditation and experiencing that level of pure consciousness is activity to integrate that into the body. And his analogy was like dyeing a cloth. If you've got a white cloth and you want to make it dark blue, you would put the cloth in some dark blue dye, you take it out of the dye, you expose it to the sun fades the cloth, but there's just a faint trace of blue still there. You put it back in the dye, bring it out, expose it to the sun, it's a little bit darker. And it's this alternation of dipping it in the dye, exposing it to the sun, that over time establishes the blue dye as a permanent color. If you just leave it in the dye the whole time and then you take it out, it just fades and you've got nothing. And so it's this idea, which is your personal experience, and it's exactly the same as mine, Nick, and even probably just the last few years, even more, just really scaling up again my exercise and, doing ecstatic dances and just stuff that gets me out of my very left brain head. And it's been wonderful. But it's this idea of both are true and both are necessary, that we need the rest. My favorite quote of all time, I think, is by Claude Debussy. And he says that music is the space between the notes. If we just have notes, it's just a jumbled mess. And so a lot of people in life experience this. Life is so busy, they're going from this to this, and there's no space in between for them to experience the joy and the love and the preciousness of life. So that's where the meditation or those sort of more non-physical aspects come in. But also that people are maybe getting too much into that, and they're getting all in their head and it's all sort of spiritual. Oh, I'm all enlightened. And Maharishi calls it mood making. He says, you're not enlightened at all. It's all a mood. Yes, actually they need to come out and get into activity more, whether that's exercise or dance or gardening or, as you said, whatever the sensory sort of experience gets embedded. So that's how we make it permanent, because these spiritual realms, whether we call it self-realization or enlightenment, they're lived through the body. They're physical experiences. Without a physical human body, we can't have this experience. So the physical is just as important. In fact, and I'll finish on this note, the experience of enlightenment is actually often considered a physical reality, because it's the stresses, it's the physiological stress that we accumulate by maybe doing too much activity and not enough rest, is what blocks the experience of pure consciousness. The analogy I use is like a cloudy day. We walk outside in the morning expecting a sunny day and it's all cloudy, and we say, oh, the bloody sun, it's not out today. The sun, which is analogous to that level of consciousness within us, is always shining. Bliss, the love, it's always there. But if there's stresses within us physically and emotionally, it's like the clouds. It blocks that experience of it in our life. So yes, the long-winded answer is both are really, really important. And I really thank you for raising it, because I think it's a commonly misunderstood aspect of this whole idea of, being spiritual, where you have to be physical at the same time.
100%. And even, I just using myself again as a case study, right? I was always very physical, very fit, an entrepreneur running companies, like very in the world, but I hadn't addressed, the awareness associated to the connection with my body, so
Yes.
I could go for a really long run. I mean, I was a power lifter, so there was, a degree of mental connection, right? But the felt sense of really like listening to my body and defining that awareness in such a way that it became, extremely vivid. That took practice. And I want to just extend that as a, invitation to any listener that might be the same, that there is these deeper levels of self-referral that we have access to, and it becomes our inner guide, it becomes our inner guru, it becomes the intuition that never really leads us in the wrong direction.
Yes.
And I think in an era where even some of the most influential people, I mean, specifically in Silicon Valley, are saying that the crisis many people are going to go through during the next technical revolution is a crisis of purpose.
Yep.
I believe so deeply that this connection to that inner voice, that irrespective of the circumstance, a beautiful friend of mine always says the miracle is equally distributed, whether there's a financial crisis or we're in, there's money being handed out everywhere or this or that actually the miracle of life is always present.
Yes.
And the more you work on this relationship to that inner voice, the more you're going to be guided towards the path and the experiences that allow you to experience that regardless of circumstance. And I truly believe it's one of the most important things we could be working on personally to establish the resilience that all of us, I think, are really going to need.
Totally. So much there to consider and ponder and unpack. But no, I love it. And I think tying those two parts, the part that I touched on and then you've just brought out too, is it's that rest. It's carving out, and again, trying to be practical, it's carving out in our days, in our weeks, that time to just be, because we can't access that intuition you were talking about as effectively without that silence or that break. And I think, so if people are looking for a really practical first step, how do I sort of start to materialize this and tune into my, this gut wisdom or the intuition we're talking about, is just to almost physically in their calendars carve out time in each day and each week, which is just non-doing time. It's just going and sitting in the park, or it's not even meditation time, or it's actually really just being and sitting and letting those natural, creative, innovative thoughts come. There's a great science, probably the last decade or two, about the default mode network in our brains. And a scientist I heard called it the genius lounge. And it's basically, and particularly in high-level executives and successful business people, when we're in this sort of focused decision-making phase of our lives and our workday, it's, frontal cortex, that's taking up all that energy. And then we finish the workday and we go and have a shower, or we go for a walk in the park, and we switch into this, they call it the default mode network or the genius lounge. And this is where we have these $1 million business ideas, or the person's name comes to us that we've been trying to think of all day. And so, yeah, this rest is the basis of activity. One of the Vedic science analogies that I've loved is this idea that success is not just about activity. A friend of mine in the US talks about we bow down and honor at the altar of activity. It's all about more activity. Whereas nature, we think about the universe and Mother Nature, her formula, her eternal formula for success is not just activity, it's rest and activity. Winter is to summer what night is to day. And so higher we want to build the skyscraper, the deeper we have to dig down first. The stronger and faster we want to shoot the arrow, the further we have to first pull it back. And so, yeah, just carving out times in our busy lives for just time to be and to be still and experience that silence, because that's where the gold will really come, and that's where we start to build our intuitive muscle, I call it, because using our intuition should be no different to going to the gym and training to have a stronger muscle like you did with powerlifting. It's just practice and trusting, and the more we do it, the more we trust it and the better we get at it.
Yes, it's so valuable what you're sharing. It was actually a mentor of mine, really early on in my journey. I think I would have been 18, maybe, when she said this to me. Success is more about mastering the aim of the arrow, rather than, just shooting blanks and hoping that you get the bullseye.
Yeah,
Um,
beautiful.
Taking the real time, for mastery, which is the rest, the silence, where, to put that into context, for you guys listening, the time where you can come out of activity and actually see a breadth of perspective again. That's definitely how I at least experience it, that enabling myself to see the bird's eye vision, that if I'm too busy in activity, I might be spending all of my time and focus on these activities that aren't actually yielding, the best result, and exhausting me in the process. Whereas if I take a step back, imagine it's like being able to see the view from the top of the mountain. You can see all the way around, especially as a leader, because people are following you. And I think that's really important. Leaders often put it on themselves, like, I don't have time to take that rest. But actually, if you don't take that rest and you're leading a team of people in a direction that is not necessarily the most effective, what's the cost of that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. No, the greater the responsibility, the greater the joy, but the greater
Yeah.
responsibility, the potential for the opposite. So
So,
yeah, absolutely.
mm,
Absolutely. And even like as you powerlifters, like athletes, and a lot of listeners will be very active, great athletes in themselves, but we now know, what's the science say? We perform, we train, and then the recovery aspect is just as, if not more, important. We need that recovery time to let the muscles rebuild and
yes.
get strong. We need the recovery to let the cardiovascular system become more efficient. And so always these two parts need to be there.
Just for founders on that, I actually think about this quite frequently, specifically founders, or, maybe CEOs, executives. I think particularly startup founders, though, when you think about your journey, it really is comparative to an athlete, in the sense that the expectation on you to be on and to achieve impossible things, every day, is immense.
Yes.
But the difference is, an athlete has scheduled rest. It's a
Yeah.
part of their recovery. And for a founder, often the outward pressure is for them to not rest, whether it's a set of investors that are expecting you to work Saturday and Sunday or late at night, to get it done, to get the return. I think viewing it in your own thinking like an athlete, and we would never expect an Olympian to consistently run a marathon every single day and never rest and be at their
Mm.
best all the time. It's an absurd thing to even suggest, and yet often we expect it of ourselves. So hopefully that insight can give you a little bit more self-compassion for the
Mm.
journey that you're on and the marathon that you're running.
It's a great analogy. Great analogy. I love it.
I've loved this conversation, Mark, so much. And I would love for you to share where these guys can learn more about your work, East meets West, finding that wisdom within themselves, and how we can support you as a community.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure of mine too, and great to connect with you. So my main website is dharmicliving.com. That's DHARMIC, dharmicliving.com. So that has books and previous podcasts and bits and pieces on it. And then I have a speaking website, sort of conference events, and I do a lot with schools now, which I love, staff development and a lot of stress in our schools, unfortunately. So that's just my name, markbunn.com.au. And for the books, the book Ancient Wisdom for Modern Health is just probably Amazon, jumping on there and searching that title if they want a bit more of sort of the Ayurvedic sort of wisdom in a written form. So, but no, it's been great to be with you, and so inspired about what you're doing for our world, Nicole. And any way we can help in the future, yeah, please reach out.
Likewise, and all those links are of course down below. So just check out the show notes for that. But Mark, until next time, thank you.
Until next time, in love.
If you love the show, please let us know by giving us a rating and tell us how to make this conversation easier for other people to jump into as well.